Hi, welcome to the Grim Tutors, your one-stop shop for all things Magic the Gathering. I'm Colton, also known as Pez.
And I'm Oblivion. So, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about static.
Bzz, static in reference to magic. What does that mean?
A static ability is an ability of an object that's always on and cannot be turned off, like flying.
Wow.
Always on. No dimmer switch.
I can think of something else that's always on.
Television.
No. So static abilities are abilities of permanence that you don't have to pay anything for, you don't have to tap it, it just exists. It's just a thing that it can do. It did.
It's just on the card, doing its thing. Let's get started, shall we? Naming off some of them abilities that are static.
Pop off, girly pop. Our first ability is Absorb. Now, I haven't heard of this, and it turns out it's because it's only been printed on one card.
One single card.
One single card.
If I had to make a guess, I would guess that this ability is from Future Sight and it's on a sliver.
Wow, 2 for 2. You are correct.
Outstanding.
So the first ability is Absorb. So Absorb is a damage prevention ability where Absorb is written as a number. So Absorb 3. It just prevents that number of damage from a single source to that creature. So it absorbs the damage instead of taking it.
That's kind of neat.
It is neat. I am kind of sad that it's only printed on one card.
I don't know. It's like they got like a little bit of a force field before the damage can get through. I'm trying to think of like an example, but all I can think of is Luffy.
Oh yeah, because he's just
rubber and he can absorb.
Yeah, he gets the bullets and then.
The next up on the list is Affinity, classic. Affinity is a ability that helps reduce the cost of artifacts that have affinity for artifacts.
So is it only artifacts?
So there are other things that have affinity for something. But the most common one is going to be affinity for artifacts, which means, like, say I have a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt, and a Mishra's Bauble. I have a Frogmite in my hand. Frogmite is 4 colorless affinity for artifacts, which means that because I have 3 artifacts, I only need to pay 1 mana to play my Frogmite. It reduces the mana cost. There's another, Thoughtcast is a really good one. I think it's 4 colorless and a blue, and it has affinity for artifacts.
And it just reduces the colorless cost?
It reduces the colorless cost, so you can pay 1 blue and draw 2 cards, I think.
Our next ability is Aftermath, which is actually very interesting because it's not on a permanent. It's on a spell.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, so there are some cards that are split cards. So there's like an instant on one half and a sorcery on the other. But you can cast the instant, but then it will tell you that the sorcery has Aftermath, which means it can only be cast from the graveyard. So you'd have to either have that card get into your graveyard somehow or cast the instant for it to be in your graveyard for you to cast the Aftermath half of the spell. That's a very complicated words.
Yes. The next one is a really fun one. I think when it first came out, it wasn't taken as well because it wasn't shown really what it could do, I think, personally. But now that we have the Lord of the Rings set, I think that this ability really gets to shine. The ability is Amass. So I will take, for example, Orcish Bowmasters, a new card that was recently printed in Lord of the Rings. It is 1 black, 1 colorless mana for a 1/1 orc archer. It has, whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to deal 1 damage to any target, and you amass orcs 1, which means you get to create a token that's an orc that's a 1/1. And then whenever you amass after that instead of amassing another orc army, you just get to put that many +1/+1 counters onto the orc.
So the first time, if you don't have an orc army, you get to make one, and then after that, you're just adding +1/+1 counters to your existing orc army.
Yeah. Or whatever other army that you have.
Yeah, so like amass orcs 3.
You make a 3/3. You don't make an army of 3/1/1s. You make 1 3/3.
Right. You get 1, and then the amass number is how many counters go on it. Our next ability is Amplify. So Amplify is an ability that allows you to reveal creature cards in your hand that share a creature type with the creature, and then that creature will enter the battlefield with that many +1/+1 counters.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I can't think of a creature type offhand that has Amplify. I'm gonna guess it's probably something green.
Probably say like elves or something like that.
That makes sense. So you would cast your creature that has Amplify. As you cast it, you would reveal the number of cards that you have that share a creature type with it. So in this example, if it were elves and I had another 2 elves in my hand, I could reveal those, show them off, ooh and ah to all, and then add 2 +1/+1 counters onto the creature that I just cast.
The next one is one that I think we'll be seeing once again pretty soon in the upcoming Ixalan set. It is Ascend, which is something that happens when you have 10 or more permanents on the battlefield. You get the City's Blessing. The card says something like, if you have the City's Blessing, you get to do something.
Like the dinosaur?
It can attack and block once you have the City's Blessing. So the next one on the list is Awaken. It is an ability that was featured in Battle for Zendikar, I believe. The card that I can think of off the top of my head is like Pert the Water Veil. It is an extra turn spell, but it has an awaken cost of I don't remember the mana cost. I think it's like 7 something like that. It's like 2 blue and 5 colorless. Awaken 3. So you get to put 3 +1/+1 counters on a land. So your land is awaken now and can attack and stuff, but you still get the effect of the spell also. So you get to take an extra turn and turn one of your lands into a 3/3 creature.
So you cast the spell for its casting cost, and then it also has an additional awaken cost.
So yeah, you could either cast the spell. So if I just cast Part the Water Veil, I would take an extra turn. But if I cast the awaken cost at the bottom, then I get to awaken land and take an extra turn.
And is the awaken cost in addition to, or just a different?
It's just a different.
It's an alternative.
Yeah, it's an alternate casting cost.
Next on the list is Bestow. Bestow kind of does like how it sounds, right? There are certain enchantment creatures that you can cast as auras to bestow their godly abilities onto another creature, granting that creature their power, toughness, and abilities. So this is a Theros thing, very godly.
The next one up on the list is a fun new mechanic that came out in New Capenna, which is Blitz. So Blitz is an alternate casting cost on a card, kind of like the Awaken, right? It's an alternate casting cost. You get to do what your card says, but at the end of your turn, I believe, you have to sacrifice it if you cast it for its Blitz cost. The next on the list is Bloodthirst. So Bloodthirst is so if I dealt combat damage to someone on my turn, and then in my second main phase, I cast this creature with Bloodthirst. It will enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counter on it equal to whatever the Bloodthirst is. So it's like Bloodthirst 2, I get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. But the creature that I was specifically talking about, I believe, is just Bloodthirst 1. So instead of playing a 2-mana 2/2, I get to play a 2-mana 3/3 because I bopped you in the face.
So next on the list is Buyback. This is a really cool ability on instants and sorceries that allows you to cast a spell and then put it back in your hand instead of having it hit the graveyard. So if you cast a spell for its buyback cost, it's an alternate casting cost, instead of putting it in the graveyard once your spell resolves, you put it back in your hand. So you basically can pay a little extra to have it kind of boomerang back into your hand to be able to cast it again. Next on the list is Casualty, which is another new Capenna introduced mechanic.
Real new Capenna out here today.
Casualty is an optional casting cost. It's going to be defined as a number. So let's say Casualty 2. Whenever you cast a spell that says it has Casualty 2, if you choose to, you may sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater, whatever the casualty number is. If you choose to do so, you will get to copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy if there are any. But you can only do it once because you don't cast the copy. But next on the list is Choose a Background. This was something that came out in Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, which was the second ever pre-release that I did. And it's kind of like an alternative to Partner. So Choose a Background, like Partner, only works with commanders that say choose a background, right? So you can have a commander that says choose a background, and then you get a second commander, but it's an enchantment. So there's the one that I used in my pre-release, I believe is called Agent of the Iron Throne. It's like 2 and a black, and it gives... Oh man, I'm not gonna remember. It does something real gross.
It's gonna be up in the screen for all of your little peepers to enjoy.
Yeah, but it basically says commander creatures you control get something. I want to say like menace and lifelink and +2/+2. I don't know, something gnarly. But my commander creature was blue, so having my blue creature with my black background allowed me to play Dimir and make use of both colors. Next on the list is Cipher. And Cipher is kind of weird, but also kind of cool. So what Cipher says is that a spell with Cipher, you can exile it encoded onto a creature that you control. And whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So the one that I play in my Dimir Rogues deck is called Writ of Return. It's 3 colorless and 2 black, and it's a sorcery that allows me to return a creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if I have some other dude bro, I usually cipher it onto somebody that can't be blocked. Big brain moves right there. So I cast it, go and grab something out of my graveyard, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then I cipher that sorcery onto my unblockable creature. So every time it deals combat damage, I essentially, for free, can return a creature from my graveyard to the battlefield every combat for the low price of free.
So the next ability up on the list is Cleave. It was introduced in Innistrad Crimson Vow. I'm just going to run down a card for an example. The card being Alchemist's Gambit. It is 2 red and a colorless sorcery. It says, take an extra turn after this one. During that turn, damage can't be prevented. At the beginning of the next turn's end step, you will lose the game, and then exile Alchemist's Gambit. But if you instead cast it for its cleave cost, which is 4 colorless, 2 blue, and a red, you get to cast the spell and ignore what is in the brackets in the text box. So if you cast it for its cleave cost, you get to take an extra turn after this turn. During that turn, damage can't be prevented.
So by paying more for that spell,
you don't lose the game after casting it, because you got to ignore what was in the brackets. Next ability up on the list, very controversial, is the companion mechanic. So each one of them has requirements for you to actually have them as a companion to your deck. So like Yorion, it could only be your companion to your deck, which essentially made your standard like 60 card formats be able to have a commander in your sideboard. which is crazy.
Does it when it's your companion, does it count as a card?
It counts as a card in your sideboard.
But not your, like, your deck.
Right.
But there's, like, restrictions. It tells you for this card to be your companion, your deck has to meet a certain
list of requirements. So, like, Yorion, your deck had to have over 70 cards just in your starting deck. Lurse, every single card in your deck had to be under 2 mana for Lures to be able to be your companion.
But you can play cards with companion just like in your deck.
In your deck.
Provided that they're legal.
But companion, now the way it works is when you have a companion, you can pay 3 generic mana to put your companion from your companion zone sideboard, whatever they call it. I haven't played with companions, because they all got banned.
It puts it in your hand.
Yeah, so you pay 3 generic mana and you get to put the companion into your hand.
So it's fucky because normally in formats that have sideboard, you cannot access cards in your sideboard until after the first match. So this allows you to take something from your sideboard and scoot it into your hand, even when normally you couldn't access the cards in your sideboard at that time. Next on the list is completed. This has to do with Phyrexian mana and planeswalkers. A planeswalker that has completed, if you choose to pay the Phyrexian mana costs with life rather than mana, your planeswalker will enter the battlefield with 2 fewer loyalty counters. Conspire is a pretty cool sounding ability. It allows you to copy a spell if you tap 2 untapped creatures that share a color with it. So you cast a spell, let's say it's blue, and you have 2 blue creatures that are untapped, you could tap those creatures to make a copy of that spell.
Next one up on the list is one of my personal favorites. It is Convoke. So let's say, for example, I have a Llanowar Elves, a Finhorn Elves, Elvish Mystic, and I got some lands. So I want to cast my card called Chord of Calling, which is 3 green mana X. Search your library for a creature card, put it on the battlefield. It has Convoke. Instead of having to pay a whole bunch of my lands into it, I can tap my creatures to help cast the spell. And the fun thing about it is, so I have green creatures on the battlefield, right? I can use those creatures to pay for the green in the Convoke cost.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought it only counted for colorless.
No, so if I tap...
It says... each creature you tap while casting this spell pays for 1 colorless or 1 mana
of that creature's color.
Wild.
Yeah.
I love learning things.
Isn't that cool?
Look at us. Teaching me stuff. I love that. I love that I learned something. Next on the list is Dash. Dash is an ability that allows you to pay an alternate casting cost where you will cast the creature. If you pay its dash cost, it will gain haste, and then at the beginning of your end step, it will return to your hand. So the number 1 card that I can think of is that raggedy ass boy.
Ragavan?
Yeah. So he normally costs 1 red, and you cast him and he has to sit there for a turn, and often can be the target of removal. Because people don't want to mess with it. But if I cast it for its dash cost of 1 colorless and 1 red, I get to cast him. He gets haste. I get to punch someone, exile the top card of their library, make a treasure, and then at the end of my turn, he just goes right back safe and sound into my hand. I love it.
A creature that I used to play all the time that has dash was Mardu Sandstriker. He's like a little goblin on a surfboard, riding like the dunes of Tarkir on his little sand surfboard.
That's very cute.
Yeah, it's very cute. He has a dash of 2 red and a colorless, and he's a 3/1, so you just get to dash him in. I always love playing the card because it's like dash him in is like he comes by on his little surfboard with a knife and just shanks you and then goes back into your hand.
Phew.
Day and night.
Yep. I only understand day and night when I'm playing on Arena, and it does day and night for me. Because once you do day and night, you have to
Day and night.
Yep. You have to track day and night for the rest of the game.
So day and night. So let's say I cast a insert werewolf card here that has day bound. You have now activated mini game within Magic the Gathering.
So if it's day bound,
it now becomes daytime in your game of Magic the Gathering.
because it tells you on the card, if it is neither day nor night, it becomes day. But if it was night, it would become day. It's so silly.
I cast my card with Daybound. It is now day. I pass the turn to my opponent. My opponent plays a land and passes back to me. My opponent played no spells on their turn, which activates nighttime. Your creature, your werewolf, presuming, will now flip over into nighttime mode because it is nighttime and the moon's out. For it to switch back into day, if a player casts 2 spells, it switches back to day, but whenever no one casts a spell, once it is daytime, it switches to night. Daytime flips into nighttime when nobody casts any spells, but nighttime flips back into daytime when someone casts 2 spells, at least. So the next ability up on the list is Death Touch, a real classic. It is just whenever your creature with Death Touch deals combat damage to another creature, it dies. It's got Death Touch.
So it doesn't matter if your creature with Death Touch is a 1/1 and the thing that's blocking it is a 6/5, it's still gonna die.
Say you have a 2/2 with Death Touch and your opponent attacked you with a 1/5. You still kill the 1/5.
Next on the list is Decayed. So when a creature has Decayed, it cannot block, and once it attacks, it's sacrificed at the end of combat.
Next ability up on the list is Defender, usually on walls. Defender basically says that the creature can't attack. Next up on the list is Delve. Take, for example, Treasure Cruise. 1 blue, 7 colorless mana. Draw 3 cards. You can exile cards from your graveyard to help pay for the generic mana. So if you had 7 cards in your graveyard, you can get rid of all of them and pay 1 blue mana to draw 3 cards.
Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1 colorless mana. Next on the list is Devour. Devour is a number, so we'll say Devour 3.
Really good at picking Devour 2, or like whenever we say, there's always 3.
Always 3. So Devour says, as this creature enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice any number of creatures. And for each creature you sacrifice, it gets that many +1/+1 counters. So if it's Devour 3 and you sacrificed 2 creatures, it would get 6 +1/+1 counters.
Gross.
Because you get the number of whatever the Devour number is, you get that many +1/+1 counters for each thing that you sacrifice. Next on the list is Disturb. So you can cast a card with Disturb from your graveyard, and it transforms into something else. So you have a creature on the battlefield, it dies or hits the graveyard somehow. You can cast it for its Disturb cost from the graveyard, and it transforms into the back side of it. When you cast it for its Disturb cost, it does the back.
Yeah.
Next on the list is Double Strike. This is a combat mechanic. When a creature with Double Strike attacks and it is not blocked, it's going to hit it twice. So let's say you have a 3/3 with Double Strike, it's going to deal 6 damage because it's hitting twice. When it comes to creatures that have Double Strike being blocked, first they will bonk the creature that's blocking it, and then if that thing's still alive, then they hit each other at the same time.
Next up on the list is Dredge. Dredge is an ability, so if it goes into your graveyard, the card with Dredge, you can return it from your graveyard by skipping a draw and dredging Life from the Loam. It's Dredge 3. So I would skip I can skip my draw step, I can skip any draw that I'm going to take to return the Life from the Loam from my graveyard to my hand by milling 3 cards.
So if you would draw a card, instead you may mill 3 cards. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand.
If you did like Golgari Grave Troll, you'd have to mill 5 cards to put the Grave Troll back into your hand. So the next up on the list is Emerge. So say I have a 3 mana creature on the battlefield. I can sacrifice that creature to help cast the creature that has emerged from my hand. It helps reduce the cost of the card by paying into the emerge cost.
You may cast this spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. Next on the list is Enlist. When a creature with Enlist attacks, you can tap a non-attacking creature that does not have summoning sickness, and it will add its power into that creature with Enlist. So it's a way to kind of buff your homies.
Next up on the list is Entwine. When I think of Entwine, I think of Tooth and Nail. Tooth and Nail is 5 generic, 2 green. You can either put a creature from your hand into play, or search your library for a creature and put it in your hand. Or if you pay 2 more generic mana, which is the Entwine cost, you get to search your library for a creature and put a creature from your hand into play.
So it's a spell that you're casting that has
an either or,
but if you pay the little extra,
but if you pay the Entwine cost, you get to do both.
There's a lot of ones kind of like that.
Yeah.
The next one on the list is kind of like that. It's Escalate. With Escalate, you would pay the Escalate cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So when you cast a card that has Escalate, you get the first thing on the list, and then for each Escalate cost that you pay, you get another and another.
So you get another thing that's on the list of things that you can choose from?
It says pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So an example would be Blessed Alliance. It's 1 colorless and 1 white, and it's an instant, and it says Escalate 2. Pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. Choose 1 or more. So you can choose multiple options on the list, but you have to pay for them. Okay. If you just paid the 1 and the 1 colorless and the 1 white, you would only get to choose the first thing, which is target player gains 4 life. But if I wanted to do that and the second thing on the list, which is untap up to 2 target creatures, I would also need to pay the additional Escalate cost. Then there's also target opponent sacrifices an attacking creature for another 2. So if you just cast it for its mana cost in the top right hand corner, you get the first of whatever it is.
So you get the first, you don't get to choose?
Yeah. Pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So it's like you cast it and you get the first one included in the casting cost, but if you want 2 or 3, you have to pay 2 colorless mana in order to do that. So it allows you to choose 1 or both or all, but you have to pay for it. Next on the list is Escape. You can cast a card with Escape for its escape cost when it's in your graveyard. You pay to cast it from your graveyard and it escapes.
Escape, yeah. Little shifty shift. Next up on the list is Evoke. There's several things that come to mind when I think of Evoke. With Evoke, you can cast the spell by, it's either a reduced mana cost, or you can exile a card from your hand that shares a color with the card that has Evoke, but when a creature with Evoke enters the battlefield, it will do its enter the battlefield effect and then die immediately. So if I evoke a Mole Drifter, it is 1 blue, 2 colorless. Mole Drifter enters the battlefield, I draw 2 cards, then Mole Drifter will die.
But it won't die if you pay...
If I just paid its normal converted mana cost that's up in the top right corner.
Next on the list is Fading. Permanents with Fading will enter the battlefield with whatever number of counters that it is. I think of Tanglewire with Fading 4. So Tanglewire enters the battlefield with 4 counters on it, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a counter from it. If you can't, then you sacrifice it. So once there's no more, then you have to sacrifice it. So Tanglewire says that at the beginning of everyone's upkeep, they have to tap a number of permanents equal to the number of counters on the Tanglewire.
Right. Next up on the list is First Strike. There's 2 creatures, neither of them have First Strike. They punch each other at the same time. But a creature with First Strike will punch the other creature first. So say you attacked me with a Ragavan and I have a Thalia on the field. Thalia has First Strike and it is a 2-1, and Ragavan is a 2-1. My Thalia will hit the Ragavan and kill it before the Ragavan gets to touch me because my Thalia has First Strike.
So rather than them hitting at the same time, when a creature has first strike,
it gets to hit first.
And if it dies, then nothing happens to your creature. Next on the list is Flash. So Flash allows you to cast a card with Flash at any time that you could cast an instant. There are certain cards that have Flash,
like Ambush Viper,
or Aven Mind Sensor,
Snapcaster Mage,
Opposition Agent, that allow you to just cast it when you normally couldn't. There are also things that allow you to cast different things at Flash speed.
Leyline of Anticipation.
Leyline of Anticipation says that you can cast spells as though they had Flash, which means you could cast a sorcery at instant speed because it has Flash.
You can cast a creature at instant speed that doesn't have Flash, but Leyline of Anticipation gives everything Flash.
Same with Veldican Orrery. It says spells that you may cast spells as though they had Flash, which means you could do anything at instant speed.
So you can play all of your stuff on your opponent's turn.
Next on the list is Flashback. So Flashback, you can cast a card from graveyard for its flashback cost, and then you exile it. A card that I play a lot is Lingering Souls, so for 2 colorless and a white, I get to cast this sorcery that makes 2/1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. That spell is cast, it resolves, it goes to my graveyard. Then for 1 colorless and a black, I can cast that Flashback and basically cast the spell again and then exile the card. Next on the list is just a real winner, and it's flying. It's in the air. So creatures that have flying cannot be blocked
by creatures without flying.
The only way that a creature with flying can be blocked is by another creature with flying or a creature with reach. So I really like to think of it in like some sort of like sci-fi fantasy battle situation. You know, any movie that you see, you've got dudes on the ground, you got dudes in the air, you know, you got all this stuff happening. So if you have dudes on the ground, I have something in the air, it's gonna fly over all of your homies and hit you in the face. But if you have something else that flies, then they can hit each other. Or if you have a dude on the ground with reach, it can reach up and yoink him out of the sky to block, is kind of how I think about it.
Next up on the list is Foretell. You pay the Foretell cost, and then during your turn, you can pay 2 generic mana and flip over the card you foretold and get to cast that card. They can be both instants and sorceries, Foretell cards.
So it's like you get to pay a little bit, save it.
Pay it, you get to save it for a situation that might happen later on.
Next on the list is Friends Forever. Friends Forever is just another way that they have worded partner. And you can have 2 commanders if they both have Friends Forever.
Friends Forever is from the Stranger Things secret layer.
Next on the list is Fuse. Fuse says that you can cast 1 or both halves of this card from your hand.
So that goes with split cards. So split cards, it's like this is a card and this is a card, but on the bottom it says Fuse, and you get to do both of those cards for their Fuse cost. Graft is the next ability on the list. Graft says Graft N, which is Graft number, and I will again use 3. It's usually on, so the creature will be usually a 0/0, but it has a Graft 3, which means it'll enter with 3 +1/+1 counters. And then when another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can move one of the +1/+1 counters on your creature with Graft onto your other creature.
Next on the list is Haste. Haste is another simple one. It is for creatures, and as soon as they enter the battlefield, they are ready and primed to attack, and also tap if they have some sort of tapped ability. So normally when you cast a creature, it has something called Summoning Sickness, where you cast it and it can't tap and it can't attack until your next turn. You gotta sit and wait. But creatures with haste, this is a very common like red ability. Even some like green cards have haste. It just means that you can immediately attack or immediately tap it.
Right, it doesn't have a Summoning Sickness.
So next on the list is Hexproof. So Hexproof means that this permanent cannot be the target of spells or abilities that your opponents control. So if you want to cast a spell and target my thing with hexproof, you cannot.
But I can cast cards that target my creature with hexproof.
Correct. It is purely for your opponents. There are also some cards that have hexproof from, so it allows you to be that permanent to be hexproof from something.
So it can still be interacted with other things, just not maybe, like, say it has hexproof from instants, it could still be hit by a sorcery. Next on the list is improvise, which is convoke, but for artifacts. So I got some artifacts on the field and I got some lands. I can tap my artifacts to help cast the card with improvise so I can save my land mana.
Next on the list is indestructible. So indestructible says damage and effects that say destroy don't destroy this. So whether it's combat damage or it's like a damnation that says destroy all creatures, it cannot be destroyed. However, if you were to, say, dismember,
or toxic deluge,
if you provide some sort of negative counter to it, it will still die. Anything that's on the battlefield that ends up having a toughness of 0 will die. So if you suck all of its strong out, yeah, you suck all of its muscles out, it's still going to die. Now, granted, you didn't say destroy it, but removing counters or giving it negative, -5, whatever, is not the same as destroying it, and it will die.
The next up on the list is infect, which means the creature will deal its damage in -1/-1 counters instead of regular damage. And if it connects with a player, it will deal poison damage instead of regular combat damage. And with poison, it only takes 10 poison counters to kill a player instead of the 20 or however much life it usually takes to kill someone. So if someone has infinite life, they can still lose the game to 10 poison counters.
Next on the list is kicker. With kicker, it is an additional cost rather than an alternative cost. You pay it in addition to the casting cost of the spell if you so choose. And when you cast a card with kicker, you get something more out of the spell. So one that I think of is one that I play on Arena in my Golgari graveyard punchies, is called Urborg Repossession. So it's 1 black and it's a sorcery. And I can return a creature card from my graveyard to my hand. But it also has a kicker cost of 1 colorless and a green. So if I paid the kicker cost, which is 1 colorless and a green, plus the 1 black for the casting cost of the spell, because it's in addition to, right? If the spell was kicked, return another target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So if I just cast it for 1 black, I have to go and get a creature out of my graveyard. Mm-hmm. If I cast it with its kicker cost for a colorless, a black, and a green, I can return a permanent to my hand.
Oh, that's cool.
So if I milled out a land or wanted to grab an enchantment or something like that, something that is a permanent, I can grab that instead with paying the kicker cost.
Nice. Next up on the list is multi-kicker, which is the exact same thing as kicker, except you can pay the multi-kicker as many times as you want.
Next up on the list is lifelink. Lifelink means that damage that the creature deals causes you to gain that much life. Whether it's dealing damage to a creature, a player, a planeswalker, whatever the case may be, whatever its power is, whatever that damage is that it's dealing, you're going to gain that much life. Next on the list is living metal. Vehicles have living metal, another shocking type of card in Magic. Everyone knows how I feel about vehicles. Living metal says that as long as it's your turn, the vehicle is also a creature. When it's your turn, you do not have to crew it in order to be able to attack with it. So crewing your vehicle is what makes it into a creature. You put your dudes in the car, allows it to drive into your opponent's faces, right? But if it has living metal, it can do that without being crewed.
Next up on the list is madness. So madness is both a static and a triggered ability. It is static when in your hand and it just says madness. But for you to be able to pay the card with its madness cost, you have to discard the card.
So it says if you discard this card, discard it into exile. When you do, cast it for its madness cost or put it in your graveyard. But lets you cast it for cheaper, and then it goes to your graveyard.
So next up on the list is Miracle. Miracle is whenever you draw this card, you may cast it for its miracle cost if it's the first draw's turn. Say I cast Terminus. It's usually 2 white and 3 generic mana. Put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries. But if I miracle cost it, it's only 1 white mana.
But you can only do that
if it's the first card you've drawn this turn.
With something with Miracle, you would draw it, and then do you have to instantly play it?
Yes, you cannot put it into your hand.
So if you drew that and it cost 1 white mana, you would have to draw it, not put it in your hand, and just immediately pay to cast it for it to be able to cast with that cost.
Right. Next up on the list is Modular. Modular is kind of like Graft. Modular says whenever a creature enters the battlefield with Modular, you put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So let's again just say Modular 3. It'll enter the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, but when the creature with Modular dies, you get to move them to a different artifact creature.
Next on the list is More Than Meets the Eye. And if you're wondering if that sounds kind of like a Transformer thing, it's because it is. There are Transformers in Magic the Gathering. So the Transformers are double-sided cards. They have one side as their like robot side, and then the other side as their vehicle, truck, jet thing. I'm not super.
Not a Transformers girl.
No.
Living in a Transformers world.
No. So if you were to cast a Transformer card that has More Than Meets the Eye, if you were to cast it for its regular casting cost, it would come into play face up. If you cast it for its More Than Meets the Eye, it would come into play on the back side, which is its vehicle side. Next on the list is Morph. So with Morph, it is a creature, and what it does is it allows you to cast it face down for 3 colorless mana. And then for its morph cost, you can turn it up at any time. If you cast it to where it will be face down, it is a 2/2 creature. Mm-hmm. Then you may pay its morph cost to flip it up.
And then you get the effects of what the card actually is. It's kind of like Foretell, right?
Yeah, but for a creature, and it makes it just a 2/2 dude.
Right. And it's just like I'm going to get to this later on, but right now I just want a little guy.
Right. Then we move from Morph to Megamorph, which is the same thing. It's just that if it has Megamorph, when you turn it up after paying the morph cost, it gets a +1/+1 counter. That's the only difference.
Next up on the list is Mutate. Mutate is if you cast a spell for its mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you control, they mutate into the creature on the top plus all the abilities underneath it. So next up on the list is Offering. Offering, it's only on a few old cards. I think they should bring it back because I think it's really cool. I'm going to give a reading of a card to kind of give you a little bit more detail and explain it a little better. So Patron of the Kitsune is 4 colorless, 2 white, and it has Fox Offering. You may play this card at any time. You can play an instant by sacrificing a fox and paying the difference in mana cost between the sacrificed fox and the mana still on your creature. So say I have a 3 colorless fox and I sacrifice that, I now have to pay 1 colorless and 2 white, and I can play my Patron of the Kitsune at instant speed.
Next on the list is Overload. So like Cyclonic Rift. If you paid just the normal cost, which is like what?
It's 1 blue and 1 colorless. You get to return 1 permanent to an opponent's hand.
Yeah, return target permanent to an opponent's hand. But if you overload that Cyclonic Rift
for 6 colorless and 1 blue,
you return each non-land permanent to its opponent's hand. Next on the list is Partner. So in Commander, if you have a commander that has Partner, it will say that it can partner with another one that has Partner, right?
Right. So like your Thrasios Timna, your Rograk Timna, your Crom, Ludovic's Opus, and Timna.
Timna out here just weaving it up. She's got so much shit to do.
Oh, Thrasio Bruce. That's an old one. Throwback.
Malcolm.
Timna.
Go Timna. Pop off.
Timnatana.
Timnatana.
Timnatana Blood Pod. Love that deck. I'm also a big fan of Timir Pirates. Shout out to Cal.
So this is a very popular way in Commander for you to be able to access additional colors by partnering two commanders together to be able to access a larger color field. Similar to partner is partner with, where it gives you a very specific partner that you must partner with. Partner with is telling you who it partners with.
It has to partner with that other thing.
One example that is very recent is going to be Frodo Adventurous Hobbit and Sam Loyal Attendant. What's interesting about partner with is that whenever a creature with partner with enters the battlefield, you may put the other one into your hand and then shuffle your library.
Next up on the list is phasing. Real, I wouldn't say controversial ability, but one that came around was really confusing and then came back and now makes a lot more sense. With phasing, when something phases out, it is not in the graveyard, it is not in exile, it is not anywhere. It is in a plane of non-existence. But then it can phase back in and exist again. Creature tokens phase out. If something with counters on it phases out, the counters stay. If an equipment is attached to something, the board state stays the same, but you pretend that it doesn't exist.
I think the thing that's challenging about phasing is that because they're calling it phasing in and phasing out, I feel like the way that it's
phase in, phase out.
I feel like the way that it's titled makes it seem like it leaves and then comes back.
Right, but it never actually leaves or comes back. It is just in a state of limbo.
Yeah. It's like, you know how you see those videos of people with birds and they like want to convince their birds that it's nighttime, so they put a blanket over the cage?
Yeah.
It's like that. They don't leave. They don't come back. It's genuinely like putting an invisibility cloak over all of your stuff. So it's important to know that because they're not leaving the battlefield. So nothing of leaving the battlefield would trigger. They do not re-enter the battlefield, so none of that would trigger. It genuinely is a cloak of invisibility, a blanket over a birdcage. It does not exist.
The next one on the list is phase out. It says, while it's phase out, you act as if it doesn't exist. It phases in before its controller's untap step during their next untap step. If it's a card that specifically says phase out target creature, it will not exist until your next untap step.
Next on the list is protection from. This is just as simple as it sounds. There are some creatures, there are some equipments, there's a lot of things that provide protection. Yawgmoth Thran Physician has protection from humans, so humans cannot deal it damage.
Feast and Famine gives it protection from black and green. Fire and Ice gives it protection from blue and red.
So when it has protection from something, whether it's a color or a type or something, it says this can't be blocked, targeted, dealt damage, enchanted, or equipped by anything of that type. Next on the list is prototype. This was something I recall from the Brothers War pre-release that we did, where there was like some real big honkin' creatures that had real big honkin' mana costs. However, they had prototypes, which allowed you to cast it for less mana, but it also made it smaller.
So it's the same creature, right? It's just a little smaller.
It keeps its abilities and its types.
The one that I liked, it's like Steel Seraph, I think.
So Steel Seraph is an angel artifact creature, and you can cast it for 6 mana, and it's a 5/4. Big heckin' chonker, right? Or if you cast it instead for its prototype cost, which is 1 colorless and 2 white, it's a 3/3, but it keeps its abilities and its types. Next on the list is Prowl. This is one that I play in my rogues deck. A Prowl cost is a cost that can be paid if you deal combat damage to a player with something. An example would be Latchkey Fairy. Latchkey Fairy is 3 colorless and a blue, and it has flying. It's a 3/1. It's just a dude. But you can pay its prowl cost of 2 colorless and a blue, and you can cast it for its prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a fairy or a rogue. So there are criteria that have to be met in order for you to pay that prowl cost. You can't just do it. And this particular card says that when it enters the battlefield, if its prowl cost was paid, you get to draw a card. This particular card, it made it 1 colorless cheaper, and I got to draw a card.
Next up on the list is Ravenous. Ravenous is Ravenous plus a cost. It says this creature enters the battlefields with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters the battlefield.
So you get to pay extra to make it bigger.
If you put 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it with the Ravenous, you get to draw a card. Next up after that is one we talked a little bit about before while talking about something else, but it's Reach. Reach is your creature can block creatures with flying because it can reach up into the sky and give them a little slap.
Yeah. They're creatures that are on the ground, but they also have the ability to
reach up into the sky and hit your flying creatures.
reach for the sky.
Next up on the list is Read Ahead. Read Ahead is on saga cards, and the Read Ahead is you can skip a part of the saga and go to a further down portion of it. It starts out on 1, but you want its final ability, you can read ahead and ult the saga right away. So next up on the list is Rebound. I cast a spell with Rebound, say Ephemerate. I get to do Ephemerate's effect, and then instead of going into my graveyard, I exile the Ephemerate, and at the beginning of my next upkeep, I get to cast a second copy of Ephemerate for free.
Next on the list is Replicate. Replicate says that when you cast it, you can copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost, and you can choose new targets for the copy. So it's just a way to make more copies of something. So here's an example. Shattering Spree is 1 red. It has replicate of 1 red to destroy a target artifact. So if you cast it for 1 red, for each time you want to copy it, you would pay
1 more red.
Yeah.
So if I paid 1 red and then 5 more reds, I got 6 copies of destroy target artifact. So next up on the list is Retrace. I cast a card, say Raven's Crime, 1 black mana, target player discards a card. It goes to my graveyard. I can then, once it is in the graveyard, I can then discard a land and pay its mana cost once again, and I get to cast that card again.
Next one on the list is Riot. I think this one's really cool, and it's also very simple. So Riot says that this creature enters the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. So you get to pick.
Next on the list is Shroud. Shroud is similar to Hexproof, but Shroud says that it cannot be targeted by anything anyone controls. So even whereas Hexproof, I can target my own things with Hexproof, I cannot target my own creature with Shroud.
Next on the list is Spectacle. Spectacle is a cost. You may cast a spell for its Spectacle cost rather than paying its normal mana cost if a opponent lost life this turn.
Next up on the list is an old one from Kamigawa, kind of tricky to understand. It is Splice onto Arcane. And it's so whenever you cast a spell, you can splice onto your spell that you cast the card that has Splice onto Arcane, and you add the Splice onto Arcane effects to the spell that you have already cast. Not all of them are arcane. It is just splice onto, but a lot of them that come to my mind are splice onto arcane.
So one that's an example is Blessed Breath. It's 1 white, and it says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. But it also has Splice onto Arcane for 1 white, where it says as you play an arcane spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its Splice cost. If you do, add this card's effects to that spell. So if you were casting a different instant arcane,
say if you were casting Goryo's Vengeance,
Orio's Vengeance says return target legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So if you cast that, you could also,
for 1 white mana, splice the Blessed Breath onto that card, so then you return your creature from the battlefield and you can give it protection from a color. So the next one up on the list is Split Second. Split Second is regarded as basically the fastest spell type in Magic the Gathering. When you cast a spell with Split Second, no other spell can go above that card.
So once you cast something with Split Second, nobody can do anything except activate mana abilities. Next on the list is Squad. Squad has a cost, and it says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may pay the squad cost any number of times. So when this creature enters the battlefield, create that many tokens that are copies of it.
Next up on the list is Sunburst. Sunburst is... so however many colors of mana you put into it, that's how many +1/+1 counters or charge counters go onto the card with Sunburst. So when I think of a card with Sunburst, I think of Prismatic Prism, It's from 5th Dawn, 2 mana Sunburst.
Next on the list is Surge. Surge is a cost. It says that you can cast a spell for its surge cost if you or a teammate have cast another spell in the same turn.
Teammate referring to a format called Two-Headed Giant. Next up on the list is Suspend, one of my favorite static abilities. So Suspend is usually on cards that don't have a mana cost, but it also is on cards with mana costs. Suspend is you can pay a cheaper amount of mana to put this card in exile with whatever the suspend number is. So Ancestral Visions is 1 blue mana, suspend this card with 4 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove one of the counters. When this has no time counters on it, cast the card.
Next on the list is Totem Armor. Totem Armor is on like enchantment auras. I think of
Hyena Umbra.
It says that if the enchanted permanent would be destroyed, you would remove all damage from it and put it on to the aura and destroy it instead. It's essentially just a shield. Next on the list is Toxic. Toxic is very similar to Infect. They both deal poison counters, but just in a different way. With Toxic is a number. Toxic 1, Toxic 3. And when a player is dealt combat damage, they're going to get that number of poison counters. So there are some that have Toxic 10 and will just straight up murder you. But unlike Infect, it does not deal damage in the form of 1/1 counters to creatures. So all of your normal combat rules still apply.
So with this one, you lose both life and you get poison counters.
Say I have a creature with Toxic 3. If I deal combat damage to a player, they're going to lose 3 life and get 3 poison counters.
Next up on the list is Trample. Trample is a real easy evergreen static effect. Say I have a 5/5 and you have a 2/2. I attack you with my 5/5 with Trample, you block with your 2/2. I'm still getting in for 3 damage because my big guy trampled over your little guy. Next is basically kind of the same thing, but it's Trample over for Planeswalkers. It is when this creature deals excess combat damage to the controller of a Planeswalker it's attacking, it will deal damage to the player.
Next on the list is Undaunted. Undaunted says that this spell costs 1 colorless less to cast for each opponent you have.
Next up on the list is Unleash. Unleash was a fun mechanic in Return to Ravnica. You could have the creature enter with a +1/+1 counter on it, but if you gave it the +1/+1 counter, it can't block. So the next one is Vanishing. So it's vanishing in a number. So again, let's just say Vanishing 3. The permanent will enter the battlefield with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a time counter on it. Once the time counter is gone, you have to sacrifice the creature.
Next on the list is Vigilance. Vigilance means that attacking does not cause a creature to tap. Normally, when you go to combat and you attack with a creature that does not have Vigilance, it will tap and turn sideways because it has attacked. But creatures with Vigilance, even if they attack, they don't tap. So they can be left up to block later.
The very last and final thing on the list is Wither. Wither is your creatures will deal damage in -1/-1 counters. Similar to Infect in the way that it deals damage in its -1/-1 counters, but it does not have poison.
Well, we have finally managed to wrap up our series on abilities, and now we get to just move on over the next couple weeks to just talk about other vocabulary. Woohoo! Thanks so much for watching. We definitely appreciate it. If you would like to support the channel, you can find us at patreon.com/thegrimtutors. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, and TikTok at Grim Tutors MTG, and the links are in the description below.
Please make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. It helps us out a lot. Subscribing is free, but it makes a big difference for us. I also just want to thank you, the viewers, for watching our content. It's been really fun. My partner and I have been having a really good time with it, so we hope that we can continue bringing fun content to all of you.
Until next time.
I just punched the fucking microphone.
Speaking of, what do you want to do for dinner tonight?
You're always coming up with these real humdingers and questions.
Like, what do you want for dinner?
Yeah.
I don't know why I said it like that. Dinner? Lida thumpikthir the leader.
What do you want? Korean.
When a creature has decayed, it... Can I help you, sir? Next on the list is disturb. So the
Disturbia.
down to same light. Air in your night.
Bum bum be dum bum bum be dum.
What's wrong with me?
A lot of things.
No, it's
Go to therapy.
Is it a song?
I didn't know that. I'm sorry.